Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and in today's video, we're going to be changing up the regular patch note format just a bit. We're going to lead with some of the more important changes, talk about each role individually, and also give you guys a tier list for day 1 of the patch. Make sure that you leave the video a like and then comment down below what we could do to improve the format. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the nitty-gritty of this patch. First and foremost, there are a whole bunch of mage champions that are getting their attack speed changed. The reason for this is that most people prefer running the attack speed rune mid lane simply because it allows you to get more priority. This is largely due to how old a lot of the mage champions are. They simply do not have an attack speed that is up to spec with most modern champions. There is a huge gap between the modern mages that are being released and the earlier champions. So these champions are all receiving a small modernization that will untie them from taking the attack speed rune. Now we can run double adaptive and actually have effective abilities in the early game. This will leave a couple of champions overtuned for sure, and we'll name those outliers in the mid lane tier list in just a moment. The main changes that most mages are receiving are attack windup, attack speed ratio, base attack speed, and then also attack speed growth. Here's an image of all the champions that are receiving the attack speed changes. Now that we covered the attack speed changes, let's go ahead and talk about the second biggest adjustment of the patch. Our reveal radius on attack is being reduced from 400 to 300 units, and the reveal circle duration is going from 4.5 seconds down to 2 seconds. This is massive. This adjustment is quite large in how it's actually going to impact you in your game-to-game play. Essentially, trading in top lane is going to be easier if you're a ranged and melee champion, and bot lane trading is also going to be significantly different. All of the ranged champions in both of these roles are going to get pseudo buffed by this because they're going to be taking less damage from minion aggro. Another nice little benefit of this change for junglers especially is that your laners won't reveal you as often. Overall, this is a super positive change that should have happened a long time ago. Without a doubt, the biggest part of this patch. Blind pick is also being replaced with quick play. Essentially, the TLDR is that quick play is most similar to team builder if you were around for that. You pick 2 champions and 2 roles, and then you get filled into either of these roles. If you don't like having to fight with people in blind pick over your role selection and you just want to get into a league game as fast as possible, then this is the queue for you. And now we have a follow-up on one of the most controversial changes of the patch, the ping changes. Last patch, Riot put a lockout on the ping timer. If you ping excessively because you're trying to communicate with people or because you're being toxic, it would put your pings completely on cooldown. This lockout change has had a significant effect on solo queue, especially in the higher MMR brackets that like to communicate frequently. The ping lockout timer has been reverted, which is a good change. However, the alert and enemy missing ping can only be used 3 times before being rate limited. The reason for this is that Riot deems these pings as toxic when they're used on your allies. So you could still use any other ping to be toxic, just not the alert and enemy missing pings. You know, it's kind of strange because the alert and enemy missing pings are used to dictate roams. I'm not sure why they would put a restriction on these two, but Riot has not been making good communication decisions for quite some time. At this point, with how extreme Riot is taking this, they might as well just remove text chat and pings from the game entirely, since apparently people can't use the mute text and mute pings options anymore. Part of this change is good, and that's returning things to the way that they were, and then the other part where they're making 2 pings borderline unusable to communicate with your team is really stupid. If you've ever played mid lane against a Talon or a Katarina, you definitely know that 3 pings isn't going to be enough to get the attention of your bot laner before they inevitably feed them a double kill. Really silly change to make because it's going to impact every single role and the communication overall. Now that we covered all these general system changes, let's go ahead and get into our first tier list, which is going to be for top lane. Top has received the most amount of changes out of any other role because of the amount of champions that are being buffed and nerfed. These changes are a little bit on the lighter side. Essentially, Riot is waiting for the item rework before they make any heavy-handed choices, which is a good thing. All of the S+ tier champions are going to remain in the exact same place, minus Tahm Kench and K'Sante. They're moving down to regular S tier. K'Sante is going to be our #1 highlight of this patch. He received a hotfix nerf last patch because he was simply too strong on release that made him go down from 54% to 50% win rate. Since the hotfix, he's been sitting stably at that 50% win rate mark, but he's not inaccessible for lower elo players to play. Overall, this champion is still definitely overtuned once you have a significant mastery of him and a better understanding of the game, but I do not believe that this is an S+ tier champion to play, especially for climbing if you're below diamond. The amount of time investment and knowledge that you need to play this champ effectively is a little bit too high to mark him as an S+ tier champ. That being said, if you do invest the time and you do understand how the game works at a fundamental level, this is a very strong champion that will not hold you back in any way, shape, or form. Tahm Kench is our next champion that's going to be nerfed on 13.22. On 13.21, Tahm Kench received massive buffs to his W and to his passive damage. Riot is simply walking back on the passive damage buffs to make him a little bit more bearable in lane. This is a very slight nerf for how strong he is currently. They're simply removing 1% of the bonus health ratio from his passive. This will be an effective nerf because the 2 strongest Kench builds are Anathema Rush as well as the Heartsteel Rush builds, which grant you a huge amount of bonus HP in the early game. Now as a top laner, if you get hit by the W, you might have a chance to survive Tahm Kench's full rotation. Overall, this nerf to Kench won't do much to affect his placement. He's still really good in the current meta and has good matchups to 90% of the top laners, so he'll remain in S tier. Next up on our top lane list is going to be Gragas. Gragas' E is going from a flat 3-second cooldown reduction on hit to 40% of the remaining cooldown. This is a buff until you're at about 70 ability haste. Gragas' R is also receiving a 0.5 reduction in the travel time on the cask. Overall, these changes won't affect Gragas' placement in the tier list too much. He's still going to have these same strengths and weaknesses. The sad thing about these changes is that Impregnator Gragas and the book build for Gragas are completely going away. We can no longer stack ability haste and have a 100% uptime on our stun, nor can we have like a 3-second cooldown flat on it with the book build. Pretty funny how Sloppy Walrus X and the boss have caused so much work to be done on this champion. And finally, last but not least, we have Dr. Mundo. Mundo is receiving a partial revert on the nerfs to his E. The problems of this champion are largely unsolved. He's really strong in lower elo when people don't understand that we don't want to fight Mundo in a all-out fight, and then he's terrible in higher elo where people can understand counter picks. He's very weak to Vayne, he's very weak to Camille, and he struggles against most percent damage in general. I never have Mundo rated particularly high on these tier lists even when he's an incredibly strong champion because the counterplay to him is really easy to access. His kit is super flawed, he doesn't excel at anything like he did before his rework, and he's kind of in an awkward limbo of being forced to go damage and tank items. We'll keep Mundo where he's at because it's a very effective champion in like bronze to silver, but the second that we get counterpicked or somebody understands how to play around our passive, this champion just falls off completely and is borderline useless until he gets Hullbreaker. Just a quick reminder, if you ever want to learn any of the champions that are present on this list, then make sure that you head on over to GameLink.com where I've spent hundreds of hours making courses for these champions. Now let's go ahead and talk about jungle. The jungle is in a healthier state, but the same problem champions remain. All of our S tier champs have been S tier for forever, and they likely will be S tier until we receive the itemization update that's going to be coming soon. On patch 13.21, Riot tried to put Brand, Zyra, and Morgana back into the jungle. Brand, however, fell a little bit short of the mark that Riot was aiming for. The percent monster modifier on his passive, Blaze, is being increased by 10%, meaning that he's going to clear a little bit quicker. Brand's E is receiving a flat damage nerf, but a scaling buff for Brand in solo lane. This nerf will affect Brand in the support role, but it's just a straight buff to Brand jungle and to Brand mid. Brand mid is pretty decent into control mages, but he does struggle against assassins, so he's relatively average. Brand jungle, however, is really good into a lot of the higher pressure AD junglers because one Q will generally result in them dying. We're going to bump Brand jungle and Brand mid up a couple tiers. Next up on our list is going to be Briar. Briar has received some significant nerfs for the first time on this patch. The flat damage on Briar's Q, head rush, is being brought down, and the armor reduction that is tied to it is also being reduced by 6% at max rank. This is going to kind of nerf lethality Briar, but not make it unusable. The biggest nerf to Briar, however, is the total amount of damage that her R is going to be dealing. We're going from a base damage of 150, 325, 500 to 150, 300, 450, and the bonus AD ratio on it is going from 110% down to 75%. This will make Briar significantly less bursty in essentially every single build. Currently, if we get hit by Briar's R, we're generally going to die unless we have our summoners up, our entire team is there to peel us, and then we have some sort of heal reduction. All that being said, this champion is still going to remain strong. I don't think that she'll remain in S tier. She'll probably drop down to higher A, maybe even middle of A tier, but she's going to remain a very strong carry jungler. Next up on our list is going to be Graves. Holy, has this champion completely taken over since they put the bonus AD ratio back on the jungle pets. On patch 13.21, which is the current patch, Graves is the highest pick jungler with a decent win rate to boast. The problem with Graves being strong in the meta is that he crowds out a lot of the weaker champions. If you cannot survive a Graves invade, then you cannot be a jungler in League of Legends. In order to combat how strong he's going to be in these early game invades, they're having Graves armor on quick draw. The bonus armor per stack is going from 4, 7, 10, 13, 16 to 2, 5, 8, 11, 14. These nerfs will hit the clear speed that Graves has because he's able to double dip on both the resistance ratio as well as the bonus AD ratio on the jungle pet currently, and make him a little bit less suppressive if we're an AD jungler and he tries to invade us. Bonus armor is also effective against mages in the early game since they auto attack so much and rely on the jungle camps dealing damage to their opponents. Graves will still be an S tier champion after these changes, but for his damage instead of for his tank stats and his clear speed. And finally, last but not least on our list is going to be Rammus. This champion was stupidly strong when they put the resist ratio on the pets because he was able to clear so fast. Now after they nerfed him, he's not able to clear as fast, and he actually does lack a decent amount of damage. Some of the nerfs that Rammus received to his bonus armor are being rolled back. The bonus armor that you get from defensive ball curl is going from 30 to 40 flat with a 75% total armor scaling in max rank. Still a strong spam ganking champion, but he does lack the solo carry potential of some of the other junglers on this list. Now that we're done with jungle, let's go ahead and look at the mid lane tier list. As you can see, there are a couple of champions that are rated a bit more highly due to the auto attack adjustments. Something like Ahri and Orianna are already quite strong, but they're made even better by not having to go for the attack speed shard. The champions that are listed here are the ones that I foresee receiving some future changes simply due to how strong the auto attack and early game pressure has made them, but overall I don't think that the mid lane tier list has changed too much. Kassadin is going to be our only mid laner receiving a significant amount of nerfs. Horse Pulse is receiving a 5% nerf to the AP ratio to prevent Kassadin from bursting you so fast, and then Riftwalk is receiving a change to the 0 stack magic damage. Our AP ratio on Riftwalk is going from 60% to 50%, which is going to be a pretty significant change. Now Kassadin is not going to be able to burst you instantly with an R into flash and then try to kill you with a W into E. Instead, we'll have a little bit more time to react to the nuke that's being dropped on our head. While the nerf to Kassadin's R is pretty significant, I don't think that it's going to affect his tiering too much. He's going to drop down from maybe the top of S tier to about midway through S tier because it's so hard to stop him from scaling. Kassadin dominates the majority of the mid lane matchups right now, and he's great into the things that are starting to crop up. If you want a scaling pick that will give you carry potential, I highly recommend that you pick up Kassadin despite the nerfs. Now that we covered mid lane, let's go ahead and talk bot lane. AD carries as a whole are still in a pretty bad state. Bot lane is completely dominated by non-crit users, and it's shown by the amount of nerfs that we're receiving here. Ziggs is the first champion that is going to receive a significant nerf. They're changing his base armor from 22 to 18, which is going to make him much squishier against certain mid matchups as well as ADC matchups. Now, if our support is able to land a CC onto Ziggs, we might be able to kill him instead of him being able to satchel away. He is receiving a slight buff to his auto attack, but nothing super significant. This champion is going to remain S tier in the bot lane, but go down in effectiveness in the mid lane against the AD assassins. Seraphine is our next bot laner that's going to receive some work on this patch. Currently, bot lane Seraphine is really strong as a farming carry, so Riot is trying to adjust her and make her more of a support. They want to keep the farming carry playstyle alive and mid Seraphine decent as well, but bot lane Seraphine is simply too OP. Stage Presence is receiving a nerf for AP Seraphine. This is going to be a buff to mid and support Seraphine. The Q, High Note, is receiving a cooldown increase to prevent her from picking up so much safe CS during the lane phase, and Surround Sound is receiving a flat 5% AP nerf to prevent farming Seraphine from being too strong. I honestly don't think that these changes will nerf bot lane Seraphine too significantly. She'll probably remain in about the same spot, maybe just a little bit weaker, but what makes this champion so strong is her safe wave clear, her decent pill, and her incredible scaling due to her teamfight ultimate. We might lose the CS here and there because the Q changes, but we're not really spamming this on cooldown anyways. For these reasons, we'll keep everything about the same. We'll bring support Seraphine up a tier, and then watch AP carry Seraphine for the future tier list. Neela has been sleeper OP for quite some time, and Riot is finally catching on to this. Neela's Q, Formless Blade, is receiving a slight nerf to the scaling on the attack speed. At the max rank, this is going to be quite significant at 10%, but earlier on, it's not really going to be noticeable. Neela's R, on the other hand, Apotheosis, is receiving a huge nerf to the damage over time. We're going from a 232% bonus AD ratio if we're able to get every tick, down to a 200% bonus AD ratio. Neela's overall tiering is going to remain at about the same place. Her early game is really good, her scaling is really good, the burst damage on the ulti is really high, but that's not what makes her such a strong champ. Now that we talked about bot lane, let's go ahead and talk about support, the other half. The support meta is not going to change for a while. We need severe itemization changes to dethrone some of these champs. Blitzcrank, Rakan, and the like are still going to remain S tier. One of our S tier champions, however, Senna, is receiving a slight amount of nerf this patch. As you know, a couple patches ago, Riot brought up Senna's overall damage. This has made her incredibly consistent and the highest win rate support champion in the game with one of the higher pick rates. If you have played solo queue at all within the last 2 weeks, I am positive that Senna is dominating your bot lane. In order to bring down her dominance, the damage on Piercing Darkness is being reduced by a flat 20 at max rank, and the healing on Piercing Darkness is also being reduced by 20 at max rank. The scaling on these abilities are going to remain untouched, but this will mean that Senna will deal a little bit less damage with her Q and be focused on auto attacking more. Will these changes pull Senna out of S tier? The answer is no. She's still going to be an S tier champion. She's really strong. She's going to remain really strong. If she goes down from 54 to 52% win rate off of all these changes, she'd still be better than 99.9% of the entire support roster. This champion is ridiculous. You need to be playing her as often as you can. S tier champ. Let's go ahead and talk about the Janna rework. I already know that this champion is going to be S tier because we've already played with this version of Janna. This version of Janna has never been bad. The reason that she was reworked is because she was too good at everything, and I suspect that this will be the case once again. Janna currently sits at about a 54% win rate in the support role with the reworked Qmax version. However, the version of Janna that we're getting now, that is a little bit more active in lane, will have around the same stats. This champion is really fun to play with. She's also fun to play against because she's not going to be spamming tornadoes from long range, and we'll actually be able to interact with her. Solid addition to the S tier of supports. Anyways, this was Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.